This video is brought to you by the upcoming board game The Red Dragon Inn 10. Stick around to the end to find out more. And with that, I'm dragging you in to the episode. So, last weekend saw the release of Tron Aries, Disney's latest attempt to make Tron happen. This time starring everybody's favorite cult actor, Jared Leto. It bombed at the box office, and it's not very good. It turns out that audiences maybe just aren't so hot about everybody's favorite cult actor, Jared Leto. While watching it though, I found myself thinking a lot about the larger shape of the modern blockbuster. In particular, the weird emptiness of many of these movies. Now, I'm not using flowery language here. I'm not talking about a metaphorical or abstract emptiness.
My vessel's so lovely with nothing inside. Now that I've touched you, you seem emptier still?
I'm talking about a very literal emptiness, where so many of these movies, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, take place in eerily empty cityscapes that can be destroyed in lovingly rendered detail, or in big, open, computer-generated voids where pixels can crash into each other without any sense of momentum or force or consequence. There are about 12 characters in Tron Aries who have been burdened with names, and outside of a few brief crowd shots, it often feels like there are never more than 3 people in the same room at a given moment. Honestly, Aries feels more like a pandemic movie than Glass Onion did. Oh, and hey, that also featured a shout out to everybody's favorite cult actor, Jared Leto.
Grab a hard kombucha, they're actually pretty good, you know.
Wow.
Jared Leto sent them over.
This isn't to say that Tron Aries is small scale. It features big action set pieces, culminating in a sequence of massive urban devastation. However, the city that is devastated feels strangely empty and abandoned. It's like watching a child knock over a Lego set. It's numbing, it's hollow, and it's empty. And it's particularly surreal coming just a few weeks after Paul Thomas Anderson made the fictional town of Bacton Cross feel like a real community in one battle after another. So this week, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how empty the world of Tron Aries is compared to similar blockbusters. We're going to look at the evolution of spectacle in film, particularly as it concerns cities, and particularly as it concerns modern blockbusters. And then we're going to discuss a blockbuster from this very year that engages much more thoughtfully with those issues. And with that in mind, let's cycle the credits. Oh hey, it's CGI Jeff Bridges from 2010's Tron Legacy. Did you hear me? I said let's cycle into the credits. It was a Tron pun. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the strangest aspects of Tron Aries is how the quote-unquote real world of the movie feels less densely populated than the virtual world glimpsed in Tron Legacy. With its streets and gladiatorial arenas and speakeasies operated by Michael Sheen playing Charlie Chaplin as David Bowie, ejaculating lasers to the music of Daft Punk. Because some people truly do get to live their best lives. Hell, even when Tron Legacy gave us a brief glimpse of the inner workings of the company Encom in its first 10 minutes, we got this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and a whole boardroom full of people. In contrast, the evil company in Tron Aries seems to consist entirely of Evan Peters and Gillian Anderson, who seems to have contracted Austin Butler syndrome but with her Maggie Thatcher voice.
You think you're in control of this? You're not.
And look, as an Irish kid who came of age during the 1990s, I have conflicted feelings about it.
Margaret Thatcher naked on a cold day.
Hell, you could even say I'm troubled by it.
Margaret Thatcher naked on a cold day.
This gigantic corporation seems to operate without secretaries, personal assistants, lawyers, or security guards. The board is referenced in dialogue, but it's never actually seen. Nobody seems to interact with these two characters directly over the roughly 48 hours that comprise the entirety of the film. Now, to be clear, in case there's any ambiguity here, I am not arguing that Tron Aries needs more sexy boardroom scenes. I am instead making the point that a movie that is largely being sold on the premise of taking Tron into the real world, a film where the official plot synopsis describes, quote, humanity's first encounter with AI beings, doesn't convey any sense of a world outside of the handful of named characters who exist within the narrative. If we're talking about the emptiness of Aries in general, it might be useful to provide a counterexample. There's a big action beat in the middle of Aries, in which 2 computer programs enter the real world to track down and capture Eve Kim, played by Greta Lee. Now, this should be a big deal. The larger world is being confronted with something wondrous and magical and beyond human comprehension. 3D printed human beings riding motorbikes that can cut through cop cars? That's kind of a big deal. It should, fundamentally change the way that people understand the universe. However, Aries never gives a sense of what any of this actually means. It never provides a sense of wonder or awe or majesty. Even Eve, who is, to be fair, at least already aware of the potential of 3D printing organic matter, takes being targeted by 2 virtual kidnappers by a business rival in her stride, and you know what? Good for her. While watching this sequence, I found myself thinking a lot about a similar motorcycle chase in The Dark Knight Rises, in which Bruce Wayne announces his return to Gotham by chasing Bane through the city. And by the way, the 2 Tron Lega sequels very definitely want you thinking about Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight films as you watch them. In The Dark Knight Rises, this motorcycle chase is a big deal. The return of a mass vigilante who hasn't been seen in public in 8 years. And the film really sells that idea to the audience. It does this by exploring how the city itself reacts to Batman, how other characters react to the chase in real time, cutting across Gotham. This includes major characters like Jim Gordon watching from his hospital bed, or Catwoman pausing during a heist to catch the chase on TV.
Well, what do you know?
The interested parties include billionaire Roland Daggett watching from his penthouse,
8 years.
What?
He has to pick tonight.
and an anonymous young police officer whose partner is old enough to remember Batman from the first time around.
Oh boy, you are in for a show tonight, son.
This chase takes place in a world that is so fully drawn that the sequence can make room for beats involving veteran character actor Brent Briscoe.
Put that thing away before you hurt yourself. Get in.
And future Tom Cruise protege Glenn Powell.
This is a stock exchange. There's no money you could steal.
Really? So why are you people here?
It feels like an actual place populated by actual people. This is in marked contrast to the empty world of Tron Aries. There is a clear sense of what this means to Gotham through the variety of reactions that it provokes. The film communicates that this is something bigger than just a bike chase. It's something that demands attention. This is what those populated scenes in Tron Legacy do as well. They show us characters reacting to Sam Flynn in a variety of ways that tell the audience a lot about his character and this world. There's the frustration of the chairman of the board, the disinterest of the software engineer, being seated as a villain for the sequel which they'll never make. There's the confusion of the security guard who, frankly, isn't getting paid enough to do this. And to be clear, I'm not arguing that any of these are complex, multifaceted, fully formed, three-dimensional characters. They are broadly drawn archetypes. But then again, it's not as if Tech Brat 2.0 and Maggie Mummy here are particularly sophisticated or nuanced characters either. And this gets at something that just irks me personally about modern blockbusters. We've talked before in this show about how the greatest special effect in Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park isn't this, or even this, but in fact, this. It's the human face conveying wonder. There is no sense of wonder in Tron Aries, and increasingly, it feels like there's no sense of wonder in any of these blockbusters at all. The original Superman was advertised with the slogan, "You'll believe a man can fly," and the film really sold itself on the premise of showing an audience something they had never seen before. In contrast, in James Gunn's Superman, the character flies pretty much exactly the same way that Adam Warlock did in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and as Black Adam did in, well, Black Adam. It's hard to be impressed because, well, we've seen it all before. It's been done time and time and time again. But there's also, underneath it all, a creeping sense that these films aren't even trying to create a sense of wonder, but instead pandering to familiarity. This is just the same old imagery, repackaged and recycled and regurgitated. A man will fly. Take it or leave it. But at least we'll play that music you recognize. However, the emptiness of Tron Aries is more than just bad filmmaking, and it's indicative of more than just the lack of wonder in contemporary blockbusters. It reflects larger trends. In particular, the portrayal of urban spectacle in cinema. Oh yeah, baby, we're going back to the silence. Back in the 20s and 30s, as American living shifted from rural areas into urban metropolises, cities came to occupy a central role in the emerging art form of cinema. In 1927 alone, you had the release of both Fritz Lang's Metropolis and F.W. Murnau's Sunrise: A Song of Two Humans. Two of the best movies ever made, but two great studies of then modern city living. The absurdity of contemporary urban living became the focus of early stars in films like Harold Lloyd's Safety Last, while Charlie Chaplin made City Lights and Modern Living back to back, exploring the tension between these concrete urban environments and the human being navigating them. The climax of The Original King Kong remains perhaps the best example of this tension concerning the city in mainstream crowd-pleasing commercial cinema. A space so large and so inhuman that it lends itself to larger-than-life spectacle. A place where a creature born to the jungle cannot survive. However, Hollywood largely drifted away from epic spectacles about urban living. From the late 30s onwards, a lot of the bigger-budget films were historical epics. Westerns or Bible stories told on an epic canvas. There were still movies about urban living, of course, but they tended to be intimate character studies or smaller crime stories, not gigantic crowd-pleasing spectacles. There was a shift back towards urban blockbusters in the 70s, with the emergence of the disaster film, movies like Earthquake, The Towering Inferno, Airport, and even Meteor. Charlton Heston was kind of the king of this genre, and you can arguably chart that evolution from the 1950s and 60s into the 70s through the Planet of the Apes franchise. In the first two Planet of the Apes movies, the apocalypse looks a lot like the spectacle-driven movies of the 50s and 60s. Westerns, biblical sagas, Roman epics. But by the end of the second movie, that version of the franchise had run its course. All my apes gone. To the city, that is. By the third film, this apocalyptic franchise has turned towards modern city living. In fact, the fourth film in the series literally takes place outside the offices of 20th Century Fox in Century City, Los Angeles. Even in Heston's career, you can see this pivot happen in real time. He jumps from the agrarian apocalypse of Planet of the Apes to the urban apocalypse of the Omega Man. The Omega Man stands out from the crowd because the Omega Man is largely driven by Heston himself. It is a showcase for a single star. However, this is presented as something melancholy and tragic. As a rule, most of these urban disaster films are by their nature ensemble pieces. Yes, there are occasionally stars like Paul Newman in The Towering Inferno or, God bless him, Sean Connery in Meteor, but by and large, these are stories of large groups of ordinary people trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. These are not movies that treat massive urban devastation as a shortcut to self-actualization for a single solitary hero. There are a number of reasons why that shift happened. Biblical epics and westerns collapsed with the old studio system, while New Hollywood proved that audiences were willing to engage with gritty modern stories set in an urban environment. Modern urban disaster films allow studios to take old-fashioned spectacle and ensemble pictures and make them in an aesthetic that was recognizable to audiences yearning for hot mainstream fare. These movies undoubtedly also resonated with an America that was reckoning with its own series of seemingly unending disasters, both natural and man-made. It was a country still recovering from the chaos of the 60s, the Vietnam War, Watergate, the oil crisis, and a seemingly unending series of recessions. Audiences could look to the chaos and carnage of these movies, whether created by men as in The Towering Inferno or by nature as an earthquake, and see something that resonated with them. However, as the 70s came to an end, cinematic spectacle evolved again, shifting away from contemporary urban environments towards fantasy adventures like Star Wars. It's very telling that Richard Donner's first two Superman movies, the two movies that codified the modern superhero cinematic genre, both build to climaxes that feel like natural disaster films, with the second featuring devastation in Metropolis that could have just as easily come from Earthquake or Meteor. It's worth acknowledging that the city-based disaster movie enjoyed something of a minor resurgence during the 1990s, perhaps prompted by advances in special effects technology, or perhaps as a response to the end of history or the unipolar moment, a realization that there was no political, social, or military power on Earth that could stand up to the United States. Therefore, it fell to nature, or aliens, or meteors, or volcanoes, or God, Zilla, to provide a worthy adversary. And sure, this might be a bit of a reach, but how else do you explain Hollywood producing two dueling volcano movies in 1997, and somehow following that with two dueling asteroid movies in 1998? That said, I still can't explain the dueling magician movies of 2006, you got me on that one. It's also worth noting that like those 70s disaster films, these were generally ensemble pieces. They were stories of a large and disparate group of people coming together to confront something extraordinary. Then, of course, everything changed. It is impossible to overstate the impact of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 on mainstream American popular culture. Images of the attacks were captured live, often by citizens who were in Manhattan, broadcast around the world in real time. Those images imprinted themselves on the popular consciousness. Inevitably, those same images began to appear in mainstream blockbuster cinema, with early examples including Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds and Matt Reeves' Cloverfield. It's sometimes disorienting to even try to keep track of the ways in which the contemporary American blockbuster is shaped by the sense memory of 9/11, leading to such strange dramatic beats as 2 separate Jurassic Park sequels about trying to militarize dinosaurs.
Imagine if we had these puppies in Tora Bora.
You're gonna weaponize them?
Or a film franchise where even the most brightly colored costumes are often just painted tactical body armor. Of course, Hollywood has always had a close relationship to the American armed forces, but the intensity with which they're interwoven into these stories feels tied to a general cultural mood of the moment. One can see it in the ubiquity of modern movies about holes or tears in the sky, or even great beams that seem to cut the sky open itself, often forming portals through which madness might pour, often over cities, evoking David Bowie's observation about, quote, the Great White Scar over Battery Park. It's also clear in the number of movies that feature planes and spaceships crashing into buildings and urban centers, to the point that there is a Thor sequel in which a dark elf effectively 9/11s the shining towers of Asgard while his minions set off suicide bombs. Which is also coincidentally one of the signs that you may be having a stroke. And to be clear, it's not that these images didn't necessarily exist before 9/11, but they do appear much more frequently, much more consistently in recent blockbuster cinema. Even eerily specific images recur, such as the falling man, immortalized by sculptor Eric Fischl as the tumbling woman, recreated in various sizes and formats. Saved here in Superman Returns, and evoked in both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, with 2 prominent characters thrown from the top of a peak marked by 2 separate towers, their forms lying broken on the ground far below. In this way, Gamora and Natasha become blockbuster cinema's tumbling women. By the way, there's that hole in the sky again. As many of these examples would suggest, this wave of blockbusters coincided with the dominance of the superhero genre, and so the superhero genre became saturated with 9/11 and war on terror imagery. What is kind of interesting is that the early entries in the modern superhero boom that do feature city-level threats tend to frame them as natural disasters akin to the urban destruction movies of the 1990s. Think, for example, of the ominous wave of doom in Bryan Singer's first X-Men movie, or the power of the sun in the palm of your hand in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. However, very quickly the superhero genre became engaged with the politics and culture of the war on terror in the post-9/11 moment. In the first 2 Avengers movies, the biggest ideological divide on the team is between Tony and Steve, with Tony bristling at Steve's suggestion that the team are soldiers.
Is this the first time you lost a soldier?
We are not soldiers.
And subsequently at the idea that they're fighting a forever war.
Isn't that the mission? Isn't that the why we fight? So we can end the fight? So we get to go home?
Given that Endgame culminates with Steve leading several armies into battle, I guess we can accept that he won that particular debate. Urban devastation, often couched in the imagery and iconography of 9/11, became the norm for these films. 2012 and 2013 alone saw the release of The Dark Knight Rises, Avengers, Man of Steel, Star Trek Into Darkness, World War Z, and Thor the Dark World. Wait, what do you mean Americans don't pronounce it Zed? They pronounce it what? Ah, so it rhymes with... I get it. I'm still gonna say Zed, though.
Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead.
These films featured massive destruction, with an emphasis on the presumably thousands of people caught in the midst of these larger-than-life events, and more than likely killed by them. And because these were superhero movies and therefore focused heavily on a single character's thematic and emotional arc, not an ensemble piece like the 1970s or 1990s disaster movies, more often than not the people caught in this chaos were reduced to a faceless mass. It's probably worth acknowledging that The Dark Knight Rises arguably does a better job with this than any of the other films around it, in large part because it does so much to develop the characters in Gotham. It's notable that a couple of the sequels to these movies went out of their way to engage with this idea. Batman vs. Superman, for example, the follow-up to Man of Steel, opens with an extended sequence of Bruce Wayne trying to save lives during the climax of Man of Steel. Avengers Age of Ultron devotes a considerable portion of its climax to the logistics of evacuating a major urban center in the midst of such an attack. However, this was around the time that critics started to notice this trend, calling out the use of this imagery in these movies and debating whether or not it was in good taste. And as is always the way with these things, it feels like Hollywood took that note in the weirdest possible way. In recent years, it feels like every major summer blockbuster ends one of two ways, with each of those two ways being a direct response to those criticisms of the numbing mega-death of those early 2010s films. The first is just to set the climax in a big, empty, featureless void, often tinted a particular color, which can either be entirely computer-generated, or just be a big empty field where the characters can cause as much damage as possible without any real sense of peril or stakes. It's generic, and it's bland, and it's boring, and it's dull, and it's just insufferable when you have to sit through film after film of it, but at least it's not as viscerally uncomfortable as watching dozens of recreations of a national trauma rendered for hundreds of millions of dollars apiece. The other approach is just to do the urban devastation, but hand wave it so that there are no casualties, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. It is perhaps bleak to think that the idea that these major cities could be evacuated so efficiently and so quickly is more fantastical than any of the superpowers demonstrated in these films.
Come on. Government's gotta have dozens of departments dedicated to that shit.
It took FEMA 5 days to get water to the Superdome.
Still, these films will insist that New York or Metropolis can be completely evacuated, so there's no need to care about the thousands of innocent people who would presumably die if they were in the city when this happened. This is how Tron Aries feels at the climax, as these computer simulations invade a city that is full of cars and buildings, but doesn't seem to have that many actual people in it. This is, to me, personally at least, very weird. It feels like these movies are trying to have their cake and eat it. They want the spectacle of urban devastation informed by horrific tragedy, but with a weird insistence that it's okay to enjoy these images because nobody got hurt, not even fictional characters. It feels very cynical and calculated. It reminds me of that early beat in Infinity War where Tony Stark stops to help the one wounded civilian in New York City before continuing on to have a showdown with the alien invaders. It's a strange beat because there are no other wounded civilians in the area. It just exists to soothe the audience's conscience and assure them that if there were any civilians in those buildings, the superheroes would probably take care of them, right? Right? If Superman loses a fight to the Hammer of Baravia, why does he need to rush back to Metropolis if that dude is just gonna stand around and monologue for 5 minutes while Superman catches his breath? There's this weird insistence that you can, just put stuff back together at the end of a sequence like this and it'll all be okay. No harm, no foul, no consequences. Hell, Lex can probably just build a luxury resort on whatever remains of the city. It could be the Riviera of wherever Metropolis is. Of course, there is a secret third thing that you can do at the climax of a movie, and that some movies do, which is literally anything but fight in a big shapeless void or an empty urban metropolis. You could, for example, do a cool biplane stunt, or have a cool car chase through the hills of California, but that seems to be outside the imagination of most mainstream cinematic blockbusters, so here we are. It's strange because at least in the older movies, often even the most egregious examples, there would still be an emphasis on these heroes helping people. In this context, it's perhaps more unsettling to present a sanitized version of urban devastation destruction, suggesting that this sort of carnage shouldn't be uncomfortable, and that it can be viewed at a remove in the abstract. Don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. It's just something you see on screen. Incidentally, this is why Thunderbolts is handily the best superhero blockbuster of the year. It's a movie that is very overtly in conversation with how much the contemporary American blockbuster, and in particular the contemporary American superhero blockbuster, is rooted in 9/11 imagery. Like a lot of recent Marvel projects, Thunderbolts is in conversation with the idea of the superhero genre and its relationship to the larger world, as demonstrated by the closing credits, which are largely about the mediation of superheroes. The film is in constant conversation with the franchise's history of 9/11 imagery. In its opening scene, Yelena throws herself off the roof of a skyscraper, evoking both the falling man and the death of Natasha in Endgame. At one stage, Val arranges a charity gala commemorating the events of the Avengers, but this time it's dedicated to
The first responders family fund.
The film features an ambush on a desert road, evoking the opening scenes of Iron Man, the first movie in the MCU, where Tony Stark is captured during the Afghanistan War, one of the most overt invocations of the War on Terror during the franchise, and something that roots the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe in that context. However, in Thunderbolts, this ambush takes place in the United States. It takes place in Utah, near Monument Valley, the place made legendary in the westerns of John Ford, connecting the superhero back to an earlier American mythic archetype. Thunderbolts often feels like a movie that harks back to an earlier form of mainstream American blockbuster, one predating the turn of the millennium. When Bucky saves the day during this ambush, he's shot in such a way as to evoke both Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible 2 and Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. By the way, can we pause and just acknowledge how much Terminator 2 there has been in this year's blockbusters? Obviously, there's Thunderbolts, which we mentioned. There's a lot of it in Mathregan 2.0 with its evil robot turned good to fight eviler robot plot. There's a lot of it in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. And it's obviously a major influence on Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another. It's kinda great that one of the big recurring themes in the cinema of 2025 is, man, Terminator 2 is pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I'm sure that's it. I'm sure that's the only thing in the consciousness that is bringing us back to Terminator 2. Certainly nothing that we've made a video about. Also, have you noticed that there's a lot of Doctor Strangelove simmering in the culture with the stage play going on at the moment? Has a Dynamite releasing on Netflix this week? There's a lot of it in The Final Reckoning, and Sean Penn's performance in One Battle After Another is very obviously taken directly from the movie. I'm sure it's fine. But while we're talking about the ways that Thunderbolts is in conversation between the superhero genre and the pre-9/11 American blockbuster, it's worth acknowledging how it treats Sebastian Stan, an actor who has done really great work outside the Marvel Cinematic Universe, playing a character who is really great in the comics but has sometimes struggled to find his place in the shared universe. Thunderbolts shoots Stan like a movie star. He's James Dean with a grenade launcher. Of course, Thunderbolts is most directly in conversation with the original Avengers, down to the fact that the film's secret title was revealed to be New Avengers, which Disney promptly plastered over all the marketing the Monday after it released. And then plastered over that marketing with marketing for Lilo and Stitch, so what you gonna do? Released in 2012, The Avengers was largely seen as one of the key examples of Obama-era cinema, like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, a populist triumph about utopian idealism. It was also one of the films that codified the 21st century urban spectacle in cinema that we're talking about today. It's a movie that resonated in that particular moment. In contrast, Thunderbolts understands that it operates in a different and more cynical context. Here, the superheroes are all explicitly former soldiers.
So, none of us fly? What, we all just punch and shoot?
Working at the behest of a criminal head of the CIA who rejects even the pretense of morality.
You're brought up to believe that there's a good guy and a bad guy. But then eventually you come to realize that there's a bad guy and a worse guy and nothing else.
For Val, right or wrong don't matter. Only power matters.
Righteousness without power is just an opinion.
Like the cowboy, the superhero has always represented something of America's self-image, in particular the explosion of American influence and power over the world around the time of the Second World War. You can see that reflected in the archetypes that make up the Avengers. Captain America as a representative of America's military power. Iron Man embodying the nation's industrial capacity. The Hulk, a creature literally born of atomic power. Thunderbolts evokes the most archetypal of superheroes with Sentry, a character who, like in the comics, very obviously recalls Superman. Thunderbolts introduces the character's powers in a sequence shot to evoke the wonder and awe missing from so many blockbusters. This is a big deal. At the climax of Thunderbolts, Bob unleashes his power upon a major American city. He erases civilians, leaving only burn marks on the ground that suggest the infamous Hiroshima shadows, the residue left by the atomic bomb after it was dropped by America on 2 Japanese cities. This, Thunderbolts seems to suggest, is the real culmination of American military, industrial, and scientific innovation during the Second World War. a weapon designed to empty cities. This is a movie about the end of American exceptionalism, the belief, held rightly or wrongly, this is not a video to unpack that America holds some sort of unique moral authority. The heroes of Thunderbolt are all soldiers without a country, lost, without purpose. Something that former Soviet super soldier Red Guardian understands better than his younger compatriots.
Yeah, okay, you want to know when I was really happy? When I was serving my country. As a hero.
In this era of moral nihilism, it falls to these characters themselves to define their own purpose.
You know, Kierkegaard says that life can only be understood backwards.
He did believe that it was up to individuals to create values.
Hell, if you pay careful attention, there are even some thinly veiled references to the current political moment.
I'll be unimpeachable.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
More pertinently, Thunderbolts is very literally about the shadow that 9/11 casts over the genre and the wider blockbuster framework. At the climax of the film, a darkness descends over the southern tip of Manhattan. The city quite literally falls silent. Notably, only one World Trade Center hovers over that shadow. However, Thunderbolts makes it clear that its heroes ultimately aren't soldiers. It presents them with an enemy that they cannot punch or shoot into submission. One of the smarter recurring motifs in the film is how pointless all of the fight sequences are, and how little these battles actually accomplish.
I left the door unlocked for you. Come up.
Instead, as aircrafts crash into buildings and skyscrapers crumble onto the streets below, our heroes act not as soldiers fighting some bleak forever war, but as first responders saving lives in the moment. It's an approach to this urban devastation that has become a feature of contemporary American cinema that feels more thoughtful than the eerie, empty cityscapes of recent movies like Superman, Fantastic Four, or Tron Aries. It not only understands why this sort of filmmaking has been drawn to these depictions of urban destruction, but what that approach represents, and how best to unpack that. Now, this is not the only thing Thunderbolts is about. Like all good movies, it's about a lot of different things. Depression, millennial ennui, and even superhero fatigue.
The Avengers are not walking through that door. We have no reliable heroes.
But while the Void obviously represents the personal call of the abyss and dark ideation, it also speaks to the emptiness that has taken root in so many modern blockbusters. Thunderbolts understands that the audience cares less about the buildings and vehicles being demolished than the lives being saved. Unlike Tron Aries, this urban devastation is anything but empty. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.
A riddle for you. What is both a standalone game and an expansion playable with all previous versions of that game? Fools! It's the Red Dragon in 10! That's right, Slugfest Games presents The Red Dragon in 10, a new standalone expansion to the Red Dragon Inn, now on Kickstarter. Like each previous version, 10 is a card game all about a group of dungeon crawlers heading to the tavern to see who's left standing at the end of the night.
So I says to the goblin, show me your component pouch first.
Version 10 can be played all by itself with up to 6 players, or you could mix and match characters from any Red Dragon Inn game or expansion. This edition will have 6 new characters, including Dominique the Resourceful and Trapmaster Alaric, along with new drinks and prizes. It is a fully stretched Kickstarter campaign, so plenty of characters and content will be revealed throughout, including content that won't be in the retail version of the game. Just like how I won't be sharing my health potions. Deal with it, sucker. To see all the details and get your hands on a copy, head on over to slugfestgames.com/getrdi10 and check out the Red Dragon in 10 today. Now I wonder what that verbal spell component does. slugfestgames.com/getrdi10. Oh no! It's making me have fun with my friends!
Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, I guess a post-credit scene is appropriate. Look, if you're going to set a blockbuster climax in a city, one more reason to make it populated is so that you can get performances like this woman here. I mean, look at her face. There's a whole story there. Who are these people? What are they doing in the middle of the street? Is this interesting enough for me to stop my commute? This woman has lived an entire life. This background extra is easily my favorite MCU extra since that woman in the background of the wedding at Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. You just don't get anything like that in the empty, abandoned cities of Tron Aries, Superman, or the Fantastic Four. I guess you could say that I love it when background performers are given a little extra.